It was great learning all about grain marketing and grain storage with the Thalmans. I'm now standing in front of the Heartland Corn Products ethanol plant, where we're going to learn about how corn is made into renewable ethanol. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Nate. How you doing today?
Good. How about you?
Good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me out here.
Yeah, welcome to have you here, and excited to have you out to Heartland to learn about ethanol and how we turn corn into a renewable product.
Perfect. Well, Tom, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be out here. Just wondering if you can start by telling me a little bit about yourself and your role with Heartland here.
I'm the CEO here at Heartland. I've been in that role for about 4 months now. My background is as an engineer. A local Minnesota guy that went to the University of Minnesota as a chemical engineer. Worked in engineering services for about 20 years prior to taking this role on. Heartland was actually one of my key clients for the last 8 years before that, and I helped them to replace and expand the East plant here at Heartland, and got to know the team, and I was fortunate enough that they took me on when the previous CEO retired.
I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit about the plant. My understanding is it's about 30 years old almost of continuous operation.
Yeah, so Heartland started in 1995. The original incarnation of the plant was a 10 million gallon per year plant using brewing technology. Through the years, the plant has grown and expanded and morphed. And today we actually have 2 separate ethanol plants on the same site with a combined production capacity of about 140 million gallons a year. And the original plant produced just ethanol and dried distillers grains, DDGs. And in, I believe, the early 2010s, corn oil production was added. So we actually have 3 products that come out of the facility: ethanol, corn oil, and DDGs.
Okay. As I've kind of gone around to farms this summer, I've heard a little bit about ethanol and its value to farmers, but I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about the value of ethanol to consumers and farmers, and why it's something that's so important for our society.
So Heartland was originally formed with basically 3 tenets. When the initial founders were coming together, they were primarily looking for a market for the corn. Basis in this community wasn't very good, and they're looking to bring value to agriculture in this part of the country. Second one was energy independence, right? Ethanol is primarily used as a fuel in road traffic, and it offsets imported foreign oil. So that was number 2. The third one was provide local jobs for the community and bring value to the area that way as well.
What's the value of putting ethanol in a car and using it as a motor fuel?
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting things about ethanol. It has a very high energy content. So when you burn it, you're providing a lot of energy per volume that's in your gas tank. Another thing that it is it's fully soluble with water. Back in the early 90s, there was a gasoline additive called MTBE that was primarily in the gasoline to, particularly in colder climates, prevent freeze-up issues in your injection systems and things like that. Well, MTBE turned out to be really bad for the environment and was banned by the EPA. Ethanol stepped in and took that void because it has a lot of the same properties, but it doesn't have the same harmful environmental effects.
So regarding corn and ethanol, I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit about kind of the amount that it takes to produce a gallon of ethanol from corn.
Sure. So we measure everything at the plant here in bushels. So 1 bushel of corn will actually produce about 3 gallons of ethanol.
Okay.
It'll also produce about 13 or 14 pounds of dried distillers grains, DDGs, and will produce about 1 pound of corn oil.
With ethanol, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit too about the environmental benefits of it. It sounds like it reduces greenhouse gas emissions compared to your standard gasoline, and there's some kind of
for sure. The ethanol is oxygenated already. It has some oxygen in it. And because of that, when you combust it in your engine, you're going to get a different emissions profile than you would just burning gasoline directly. And that reduces CO2 emissions, and that's a measurable thing, and there's a lot of information and facts that you can find out there on that. One thing that probably isn't as widely talked about is the particulate side of things. So crude oil that's refined into gasoline does have a fair amount of particulate in it, and it's filtered out and processed, and there's levels for that. But if you compare the tailpipe emissions from burning ethanol versus burning gasoline, the ethanol has less particulate in it. So things like smog and just general health, burning the ethanol actually helps in that regard as well.
Well, it's been great talking about it. I'd love to go and see the production process if that would work for you.
Yeah, let's do that. I think there's a lot of interesting things to see.
Awesome, let's do it. Well, so Tom, we're at the start of the ethanol production process here. I'm just wondering if you can tell me kind of what's happening behind us.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we've received our corn from our farmer. We've stored it in storage bins, and now we're ready to grind it.
Awesome.
So what that means is we take those corn kernels that we've received and we convey them up to the top of this structure, and then we run them through something called a hammer mill. That hammer mill is nothing more than a big grinder that takes that corn kernel and turns it into relatively small particles that are called flour. It looks just like flour.
Yeah.
And that flour is then conveyed over to the slurry process, where we'll then start to break that flour down into its consumable components.
Yeah. How much corn are you guys processing, maybe in an hour or a day?
Yeah, so again, the corn itself at this facility, we're receiving about 135,000 bushels per day. Is about what we're grinding.
So Tom, just tell me about where we are.
Yeah, so here we're at the slurry process. So we're taking our milled corn flour from our hammer mills. We're combining it with hot water, an enzyme, to take that flour and break it down into consumable starches that our yeast can then turn into alcohol.
Why does the corn need to be turned into kind of a slurry before it's processed?
Yeah, so it's just like when you're doing your home brewing. You need a sugar that the yeast can eat. So they can't eat the corn directly. This process takes that flour, and then we combine that enzyme that will break that flour up into the consumable and non-consumable parts. So this is the part of the process where we take that hot mash that we created in slurry and liquefaction, and we cool it down to get it to a temperature that will allow the yeast to ferment it into alcohol. Over the years, energy optimization and ethanol plant efficiency is something that we've been working very hard at to drive the overall amount of energy it takes to produce our ethanol and get it as low as we possibly can. So we've got very, very expensive, very big equipment to drive our overall energy efficiency up and ultimately make the ethanol that we produce that much more better for the environment.
So Tom, just tell me about kind of what's happening on this level of the...
Yeah, so here we had just talked about slurry and liquefaction. Then we take that hot mash and we cool it through our mash interchangers. Then we take that cooled mash that's at about 90 degrees and we put it in large fermenters. When we're putting it into the large fermenter, we add some additional enzymes to further break down those sugars during the process, and we also charge it with a batch of yeast. And so in the fermentation process, we've got here next to us a 500,000 gallon tank that will take that mash and it will convert it into three things. It'll convert it into the ethanol that we want. It'll convert some of that mass into CO2, which is vented off and scrubbed, and in some plants released to the atmosphere. And we're looking at opportunities for potentially collecting that CO2 and producing another product from it. So at the end of the day, when a fermenter is complete, The fermentation cycle lasts about 60 hours.
Okay.
At the end of that 60 hours, we now have a liquid stream that is roughly 15% ethanol and 85% water,
Okay.
along with about 12% unfermentable solids.
Okay.
That unfermentable solid stream is what we get our DDGs from and our corn oil from.
Got it. So, Tom, just tell me about kind of what this step in the process is.
Yeah, so this step in the process is distillation. We're taking that beer that we produced in fermentation and we're running it through a series of distillation columns to separate out the water from the products that we want. The first distillation column takes all of our ethanol and sends it overhead with some water.
Okay.
And out the bottom, we get all of our unfermentable solids and some water that then go on to be further processed into our DDGs and corn oil.
Yeah.
That ethanol and water stream is then sent to another distillation column to concentrate it up to about 95% ethanol.
Okay.
And that's as far as you can take that purification process with conventional distillation.
Sure.
From there, we go into some molecular sieves
Okay.
to break the azeotrope and get to our fuel grade ethanol that has about 1% moisture in it.
So by the time the ethanol's through these 3 distillation tanks, it's pretty much ready to go?
Yep, the 200 proof ethanol product comes right off of our mole sieves here.
Okay.
It goes into storage tanks where we do some QA checks on it.
Sure.
And then it's ready to be, at that point it's undenatured,
Okay.
meaning it's pure. It goes into storage tanks, and then from there we can denature it
Okay.
and load it out for use as a transportation fuel.
You mentioned that there's kind of byproducts of ethanol that are made into DDGs. How does that happen, and kind of where does that separation take place?
Yeah, so that slurry stream that comes off the bottom of that first distillation column,
Yeah.
we call that whole stillage.
Okay.
And essentially it's just unfermentable corn solids,
Got it.
some dissolved solids from the process, and water.
Yeah.
And so we'll run that material through a centrifuge
Okay.
to produce wet cake and thin stillage. So the thin stillage basically has all the solids removed from it, but we also want to, right, for conservation purposes, we want to reclaim all the water that we can.
Oh, sure.
So we take that thin stillage
Yeah.
and we run it through a series of evaporators to remove water that we can then recycle and reuse in the process.
Okay.
And produce a syrup that can then be combined with that wet cake to create the DDGs. That syrup stream is where all of our corn oil is.
Got it.
So we'll actually run that syrup through another centrifuge to pull the oil out before we do that combination with the wet cake to produce DDGs.
So, Tom, my understanding is that we're kind of standing in front of the step in the process where those DDGs are really dried down and made into that.
Yeah, we absolutely are. So we looked at the centrifuges. Those centrifuges take that 12 to 15% solids stream off the bottom of the beer column and concentrate those solids up to about 35% to
Okay.
now what we call wet cake. That wet cake is then conveyed up into a series of mixers where it's combined with the dissolved solids that were produced in the syrup process.
Okay.
So those two things enter the dryer at about 35%, and then they're dried, tumbled through a dryer with hot air, and then at the back end you get about a 90% solids product that will be that distiller's grains that are then marketed from the facility and used in animal food.
Tom, we've seen the ethanol process, and it seems like we're at the end of the line here. Can you just tell me about this big pile that we have behind us?
Yeah, so these are our DDGs.
Okay.
So it's an animal feed. It's where all those unfermentable solids from that fermentation process to produce the ethanol.
Sure.
This is what's left over.
Yeah.
It has a lot of protein in it, a lot of
Okay.
fat in it,
Yeah.
a fair amount of fiber in it. So it's actually a good food source and is used in a lot of animal feed industry. Everything that comes in the kernel of corn, we are using.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for having me out here today. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah, a pleasure to have you guys. Hope you learned a little bit about an ethanol plant today.
Thank you. It's great to be here and to learn more about it. Well, that's it for this episode of Nate on the Farm. Thanks for joining me again. Tune in next time to learn all about corn harvest and how farmers get their crops off the field and into the various grain channels. everyone, I'm Nate Gottlieb. Welcome to another episode of Nate on the Farm. Little wind, I think. Well, we're gonna, I'll start over real quick. We're gonna, yeah. So is there anything you need to do when you have grain in storage to keep it good? Is there anything you need to do once you have grain stored to maintain its quality and not? Well, to touch on ethanol, so I'll start going over, but maybe the ethanol is it becomes more concentrated throughout the process. Like at the beginning, it's maybe 20% alcohol. And then
Yeah, we can maybe talk about that around the corner here where it's a little quieter.
Sure.